Mr. Credico.
Absolutely. I think we are on that path. It's inexorably going in that direction. I know we have to fight against it. It's gotten worse and worse over the last couple of years, and I really believe we are going towards a fascist, totalitarian type of state. And you can just see the writing on the wall, all of the shit that's been put in place. Surveillance, mass surveillance. You got the people like Hillary Clinton and the clown who used to be Secretary of State, what's his name?
Pompeo.
John Kerry coming out, speaking on behalf of.
There are two clowns that wrecked Secretary of State.
Telling the First Amendment, and these wars are happening. These wars are planned. These wars are planned, and we've never been able to really stop a war. In fact, Gore Vidal says in Empire, it doesn't matter how many women march down Fifth Avenue with a banner, the wars are going to happen. Just like the Iraq War was going to happen, there was nothing we could do about that. We got 1 million people here right on First Avenue,
Right.
And nobody gave a shit. The press didn't cover it. So that's not talking about freedom of speech. We're talking about freedom of speech.
Okay. I will need to leave when we finish this panel because I have to go through the Lincoln Tunnel, and coming the other way are about 25,000 maniacs about to genuflect before an authoritarian who's going to give a speech before a 100 times life-size photograph of himself. When's the last time we saw that at a mass rally?
In 1936.
Right. Scott Ritter, you and I were about to get on a plane to give some speeches in St. Petersburg when three thugs armed to the teeth as if they were about to fight a war approached you without identifying themselves or showing a warrant or any papers whatsoever, demanded your passport. 2 weeks later, 40 thugs, including a SWAT team and a bomb squad, showed up at your house in order to retrieve your electronic devices. And during the course of this, they showed you copies of every text and email you had written or received in the past 2 years. Did that silence you?
I'm sorry, Judge, I can't answer that question. Look, I'm going to use a word. I'm in public, and my wife would kick me if I use. But the job is to be honest about what happened. When I resigned from the United Nations Special Commission in August of 1999, I was called into the office of the CIA liaison at the U.S. mission. I'd been working with him. I did a lot of intelligence work, and he said, the National Security Council wants to talk to you and talk you out of resigning. And I spoke to a very senior person in the National Security Council, and they pled. They said, if you resign, that'll hurt the inspections, it'll hurt America. They played to my patriotism. And I said, I don't want to hurt America, but you gotta let me do my job as an inspector. You can't interfere with the work of inspections mandated by a Security Council resolution that you voted in favor of. They said, well, we can't do that. So I said, then my resignation's in. Hung up the phone. As I left the door of the CIA gate, Scott, we've been friends a long time. I like you. And I've given you a message from the FBI. If you walk out this door and you submit that letter, the FBI is gonna fuck you for the rest of your life. They will fuck you, they will fuck your family, they will fuck your friends, they will fuck anybody you have business association with. And I believed him. The FBI fucked me when I was trying to get on that airplane. They fucked me when they raided my house. They're continuing to fuck me today, but not responding to any of my efforts to find out what the fuck they're doing. I apologize for the language, but we need to be blunt here.
You've been hanging out with Salenti.
Guilty as charged. But the point is, silence me, not on your life, Judge. It's worse than that. Because it's not just the intimidation, the chilling impact you talked about. I'm on a goddamn death list, funded by the United States Congress, that has been put together by the United States State Department, working with Ukrainian intelligence, who are targeting me, Diane, Jimmy Dore, and others in this audience for death, for the crime of speaking our minds, exercising our free speech. If this doesn't piss you off, ladies and gentlemen, nothing will, because it pisses me off. There's nothing more precious to me than as an American to be able to speak my mind freely, and my government's trying to silence me, especially when I have a track record of being right more than I am of being wrong. No, I'll never be silenced, Judge.
God bless you, Scotty.
Yeah,
So we all know that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech does not mean what it says. We all know that the government is in the business of abridging the freedom of speech. But we all know that without the freedom of speech, the government would be less transparent, more totalitarian, more warmongering than it is. We all know, and Madison knew, that the freedom of speech is the linchpin to free people. Chief Fritz, when you wrote your terrific book, which I read last week, Deadly Betrayal, The Truth About Why the United States Invaded Iraq, the government interfered with your freedom of speech, did it not? The most delicious pages in that book have no words on them. What's that all about, Chief?
You know, Judge, I was thinking about that, and if you asked that.
You knew I was going to go there. We talked about this.
I knew it. Let me just first say one thing on behalf of Scott. The first thing, as I mentioned earlier, in the previous panel, he deserves to scare you, okay? He deserves to scare you. I want you to be fearful. Secondly, he has a right to be mad, okay? And he's fighting on behalf of each one of us in this room, okay? So I applaud you, Scott. Okay, he was apologizing to me. Apologizing to me for what?
Oh, Scott, don't apologize. And Chief, I'm glad you said that. The codifier of the concept that our rights come from our humanity, St. Thomas Aquinas said many times, anger is justified, and no anger in the face of injustice is weakness. Ritter is anything but weak. Now, Chief, they made you black out certain words in your book. Can you tell us now what those words were? Now we'll find out who's the federal agent in the audience.
There's a couple.
Well, there's always more than one. They never go anywhere alone.
We're the dullest people in the room.
Well, I will tell you this. My book is part of fighting our freedom of speech. You know, I wanted to do it the right way. I jokingly tell folks I'm a poor man's or a cowardly Daniel Ellsworth. You know, he released, one of the first things Judge asked the first time we met, and he thought, hey, you didn't release the classified document. No, I didn't, because I didn't want to give them an excuse to come at me like they did doing, Scott right now. I said, I'm going to do it the legal way. I've been around classified information my entire life. I was one of those young folks at the age of 22. So I understand our freedom of speech, freedom of press, and so forth. I wrote this book knowing that they were going to redact some of it, and guess what? To shut me down.
Right.
You know, to keep things away from the public. So I did it anyhow. And another thing I did was I said, I'm going to challenge them. A former boss of mine said, Fritz, you're a rebel. I kept that blanket area in there to show you how the government is still trying to shut me down, shut my freedom of speech out, and to keep information away from the public. Just guess what? That is not classified. But it takes away my freedom of speech. But guess what? I wanted to get the book out, and so I released it as is, but I wanted you to see what redacted, but I'm going to continue to fight those redactions. I've already been in communication.
Well, Chief, we all know that the government overclassifies. They classify because they want to hide, they prevent their own embarrassment and their own crimes.
Yeah. And can I say one other thing, Judge? One other thing, when you have people like Scott and myself and Larry in this room, we were in the military to protect us and defend our rights. To defend our rights. But guess what? There's one key word in there, or statement I should say, both domestically and foreign. This is domestic fight on our behalf.
Russell, the Supreme Court has ruled that satire is absolutely protected free speech. If you appeared at a comedy club not very far from here and mocked Benjamin Netanyahu for slaughtering innocents, would the government interfere with you?
Probably not, but if you make an AI parody of Kamala Harris in the state of California, they can prosecute you according to their new laws.
Can you appear in a club on the Columbia University campus or the NYU campus and use political satire to degrade the people that don't want us to be here?
No.
Why not?
Uh,
They are public accommodations. In New York City and New York State has a public accommodation law. They receive millions from the state and millions from the feds. In return for the receipt of that money, they promise to use their public accommodations as if they were the government, and therefore the First Amendment applies to them.
They will claim that they are private universities, and they have that right, which of course does not explain why there's an enormous fence around CCNY now. Whenever the government feels threatened, your freedom of speech is finds its limits very quickly, and that's what we're seeing now to a degree. We saw it to some extent during Occupy Wall Street. We certainly saw it in the Standing Rock protests.
Right.
We probably have not seen it on this scale, particularly regarding freedom of speech on college campuses since the Vietnam era.
There's a famous Supreme Court opinion about the Nixon administration dispatching plain-clothed Army officers to go right up to anti-war protesters. I'm going to mock this with Jimmy right now, and snap a camera in their face. In the era before we all had iPhones and cell phones with cameras on them. And when the anti-war people complained and the case made its way to the Supreme Court said, that's not chilling, that's not interfering with free speech. That opinion since has been modified. Has the government ever gotten in your face to try and chill your free speech?
Well, some government agency did when they got into after I spoke about the Nord Stream pipeline at the United Nations Security Council. They used Pegasus, which was developed by the Mossad and cost millions of dollars if you want to use it.
Or this is the zero click.
So they got into my computer and my iPhone and completely controlled my iCloud account, and that was very chilling. And so I immediately, it happened when I was on a plane coming home from Europe, and when I called my IT professional who used to be in the military himself as a professional, he told me, Jimmy, I couldn't do this. This is not an individual, this is a state actor. And this is to try to shut you up. And so, yeah, it's happened. And so now they have everything. So they have anything, any compromising material they want, they got it. They got into my iCloud, they get into my computer, they get into my iPhone. And so the answer to you is yes.
Randy, I have a friend who's a Catholic priest who only says the traditional Latin Mass. And he said a traditional Latin Mass, this is a sad story, said the traditional Latin Mass in Richmond, Virginia, and there were a half dozen FBI agents in the audience pretending to be traditional Latin understanding Catholics. They received communion that fit in with everybody else, and then of course they wrote up reports for Chris Ray. When my priest friend got back to New Jersey, his cell phone and his laptop didn't work, and he took it to his IT guy who said the same thing to him what Jimmy's IT guy said to him. Only a state actor could have done this. Did you give some bombastic sermon lately? No, I just said the Mass in Latin. Does any of this surprise you?
No, and, why don't you ask those questions to Jimmy? No, it doesn't surprise me, and I must tell you about the government, the fear. Let me just talk about the fear of that happening to me. I went
Fear.
to Russia. The fear. There is a sense of fear that it may happen or it is happening. Last year at this time, even before, I think it was in May of 2023, I went to Russia, then I went to Donbass, I went to Donetsk and Mariupol, and I reported back. It was on Galloway's show. I did a ton of shows, right? And as soon as I come back, But prior to that, for the previous 4 months, and I'll say this because I was already outed on it by the Wall Street Journal, I had been booking people to speak at the UN Security Council. And to 4 or 5 people, I recommended to the deputy ambassador there that they use them. And Scott told me recently, you better sign up as a foreign agent. Now, I wasn't getting any money for this, but I had done that 4 or 5 times, and some 4 or 5 times since, because I've been outed on it, so they know. Now, when I get back from Donbass, there's been a sense of fear. I was driving up to Kingston where Gerald Celente, the great Gerald Celente, lived. When I got back a week later, I was going 45 miles an hour on 87 going up, and whenever there was a SUV behind me, I was even going slower, just hoping that he would pass me up. I still have that fear right now, and I think that's the point of all of this, is to scare people. Scott definitely has iron balls. I don't, you know what I mean?
Well, all right, Scott, Randy is right. You are not the average typical American. You are a tower of strength that people look up to. Not everybody lets that fear roll off their backs the way you do. What advice do you have for people that are afraid, probably not anybody in this room, but people that are afraid to speak their mind? Because Congress shall make no law should mean no law.
It's a tough one. It's the toughest one there is. They put me in jail. They put me in jail as a sex offender. They put me in jail as a sex offender in a jail where they were supposed to kill me because I was a sex offender. And for 3 years, I had to wake up every morning wondering if this was the morning they were going to get me. The way I confronted it was with the truth. I confronted the prisoners, I confronted the guards, I confronted the warden. I said, you want to kill me? Find a frickin' crime. And I put my paperwork. Guard says, never show anybody your paperwork. I had made my paperwork public because there's no crime in there. By living that experience, what I learned is the worst thing they can do to you, ladies and gentlemen, is kill you. And that ain't shit. Because the worst thing that can happen is you wake up every morning a goddamn coward. Look yourself in the mirror and say, I have failed to live up to that which I aspire to be. A dead man at least dies honorably. But a man who betrays everything he stands for and lives his life in fear of what could happen to him is a coward. And a coward, to me, is nothing. They tried their best, Judge. There's nothing they can do to make me afraid. There's literally nothing they can do. They could shoot me today and I would die satisfied knowing that the last time I looked in the mirror, the man looking back was A-OK.
Ladies and gentlemen, the personification. The personification of intellectual honesty and personal courage. If personal courage were a human being, we would call this Scott Ritter. Wow. There was somebody else here that I love, and I'm going to surprise him by doing this. Don't get the wrong idea, Colonel.
I get the next one for him.
Colonel Larry Wilkerson is a regular on my show and probably makes a lot of enemies every time he's there. Not with the audience and not with the host of the show, that's for sure. And Colonel Larry is also a great manifester of personal liberty in a free society. Well, we have to end this. We could go on for a long time. There's only 2 statutes, 2 criminal laws that the Constitution authorizes: treason and debasing the money supply. Congress has written 5,500 criminal laws. It's almost impossible to get through your day without unwittingly violating one of them. And if they want to find it, remember what Joe Stalin said: show me the man, I'll find you the crime. But that crime can never be speaking your mind. As JFK once said, in the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its maximum hour of danger. This is that hour. We are that generation. We must defend it to the hilt in the here and now. Thank you, and God love you.
Do you want capture some with
Yeah,
for the other
keep
people?
it.
Yeah. But I'm saying, do we need
Yeah.
let them know it's being broadcasted.
Huh?
It's being broadcast. I mean, if you know,
Before we leave, Scott,
Hey, my straight work.
Good work, buddy.
To address power or
There is another panel coming up, ladies and gentlemen. Don't go anywhere. There's another panel and Ritter's involved, so stay right here.
Hello there, how are you? Good.
Good job, all over you guys.
Just wanted to let everyone know. Just want to let everyone know there's another panel coming up, and so stand by, everybody. We got another panel coming up. We're going to have a lot of fun. They'll be milling around for a couple minutes, and then we'll have our guests back in another 5 minutes or so. We're getting everybody together for the panel, so don't go anywhere. And share this on all your social media platforms so people know that it's going on currently, and then I'm running it live. Thank you.
you want to pause it and then we can do it up or just continue?
Keep it going. Okay. We'll lose people. Get the audience.
Yeah.
I'm on the ballot all by myself. My own slide. 70,000.
Nah, good.
Hey, Judge, are you on this list? I don't know. My wife just said. You saw my last dog. Stone is That dog died 2 years ago. Roger Waters, my friend, got me this dog.
She's on the show. She's on the show as an executive.
You know, I actually back then, I don't want to get in the way of the flood. I see on so many shows. I don't think I'm going to be able to. I get
What I realized is Scott Ritter has a very nice picture here. It's a and everybody else. Yeah. Red shirt. Like 6 months, something. When you got him in the beginning, so we're not playing my show, right?
Hopefully,
The sound is gross.
Excuse me.
We're gonna play it. We're gonna show my shirt. We're gonna play it.
I gotta make
So I try to get like people who are interested in getting this.
Garland is on Friday.
Wonderful. Looking forward
There
to it.
is another panel, so if you're trying to come up to talk to the speakers, you could probably wait afterwards because we're tight on time. So just thought you should know that.
Thank you, thank you. Had to do the Kamala Harris joke. I mean, come on, how do you not do that?
Very funny.
Hello. Wonderful, wonderful. Filming live for my YouTube.
Yeah, hold on.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have a third panel. This is Saving Democracy, perhaps the most important panel of them all. So if you can take your seats, we can get started. Take your seats so the third panel can begin. Thank you very much.
Where are the panelists at? They need to get up there.
All right.
Where's we gotta find yeah. Oh, there you are. I'm looking for you. You the man. Yeah. Come and introduce you.
Russell.
I'm not gonna use the mic. I'm good. I'm not gonna use the mic. But you need it though. I don't need it. The panel up there? The panel up there?
Hey, can we get the speakers back on the panel, please? We're supposed to be starting soon here.
Please.
I'm Michael O'Neill. Going to vote for you. My wife is.
Some of these people already like Rus on the second round.
You don't have to go to them even again. Whoever can afford them. People are,
All right, good. Let me know the panels.
I saw him walk by this way. They leave?
Was he on your panel?
Jimmy left? It's okay.
Did he know he was on the panel?
Yeah, exactly. Let's go with.
Sure he left though? Oh, see what? You can take the train easily enough. Yeah, it's like I just did for 10 years. I didn't use all of it. That's enough. I've never been. Garland, are you in this too?
The bonus panel? I'm pretty sure I am. I'm just waiting for my guy. Oh, there he is. As soon as I'm ready, as soon as they get ready.
I mean, usually to get here when I today, usually I would take the walk.
What time do you need?
Oh, 45 minutes is the normal thing.
Joe Monahan.
I'll fill it up. Pictures go to town.
All right, I've been given
We have
Okay, everyone, we're going to be starting this panel now.
And NATO putting that together. I would expect
I'm okay. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get started again. and I see that there are many of you all enjoying beverages, I think maybe even some dessert, but we must press on now and get through this final panel. And I think I heard a gentleman that really was trying to ask a question of Scott, and this may fall in to write exactly what he's looking for. The most probably important thing of today is saving our democracy. And I think we have a great panel here, but I would like to take the opportunity to introduce our moderator. Somebody that I think all of you know, I had the opportunity to meet for the first time back in June. And I want to tell you, I was so impressed with this young man. And I say young man because he is truly a young man. You know, I was told that he's a Bronx warrior, a patriot. But I want to add a word for myself, a hero, for everything. As a young man, which really makes me more prouder, is it okay if I tell your age? He is 26 years old. No. He is way beyond his age and his maturity and his drive to be a leader in our America. And I am so proud of you, Jose. He's a political organizer, and stated earlier, a true leader. Believe it or not, this young man is internationally known. I've been on podcasts with him and other venues, and he's known worldwide at 26 years old. What an honor. I'm told he's courageously intervened in events with Joe Biden, Mike Pompeo, Kamala Harris. Well, no, whoa, Kamala. King Jeffries, Nancy Pelosi. But I got to tell you, one is not on here, which I was truly impressed. If you didn't see this one, in fact, I think I called Jose, Paul Krugman. Did y'all see that?
Yes, yes. The best.
That was so great, I had to call him and say, you are
The best. The best.
But I tell you, all of you know Jose. I could go on and on and on, but I want to get this panel going. But I just wanted to have opportunity to say a few words about Jose because I am truly proud of him and I am praying. And I want y'all to get out there to tell everybody to vote for this man because the individual that he is going against, I don't mind saying this is my freedom of speech. He is bought and paid for. This man is not. He's for you. Oh, Jose.
All right, I'm very happy to be moderating this panel called Saving American Democracy. But here's the thing, and I think Scott in the beginning of this event referenced that there might be a debate going on or so, and I just thought I got to stoke the flames here because we don't live in a democracy. We live in a constitutional republic, and you should be happy that you don't live in a democracy. See, Diane actually could do something if she was a U.S. senator. She can use something called the filibuster, because she has the right, out of all of those senators, if every single one of those people want to declare war with China or Russia, she has the right to use the filibuster to stop that. If they want to send another aid package, she can filibuster till she is blue in the face and stop that, because that is exactly what the framework of the Constitution provides. If 99% of people are wrong and you are in the minority but you are right, does that still make you wrong? Of course not. And the reason I say you should be happy you are not in a democracy is because your voice matters more in a republic than it does in a democracy. Everybody here has the right to elect themselves to stand up for the truth. The truth is not dependent on the majority and the minority. Okay, I'm going to say that one more time. The truth is not dependent on the majority and the minority. Okay, if you went down south in the 1900s, in the 1910s, in the 1920s, in the 1930s, and 80% of the town believed lynching was okay, but there was a sheriff there who was there to enforce the law that lynching is illegal. Does the 80% of the population mean that they're right? Of course not. That is why we have authorities. to lay down the law and say, no, you are all wrong. And today, every single person in this room has to become an authority right this second. That's what it means to save American so-called democracy, which is really saving the American Republic. Now, I apologize for taking the prerogative here as a moderator to insert my own opinions. Usually you're not supposed to. No.
But you're Jose.
I think we're done here.
Now, some of our panelists you're already familiar with. We have Diane Sayre, of course, Garland Nixon, Russell Dobular, but joining us, we have Jeff Norman, who's actually a good friend of mine from North Carolina. Every time he talks to me and calls me on the phone, we talk for 3 minutes before we get to the subject that we have to talk about. Jeff Norman is a former stand-up comedian. What happened? Did you lose your sense of humor? Or?
We're still looking for it.
Actor, producer. He currently is the director of U.S. Tour of Duty, a nonpartisan cultural revival led by military veterans and their allies. Jeff is currently the co-host of 2 popular podcasts. I think I've only been on one, actually. I've not been on Ask the Inspector.
No, you're on the Whiners, though.
I was on the Whiners with Ryan Milton, another good friend of mine. So with that, I think I'm going to pass it on here. I think I've had arguments with Russell on this topic before about so-called American democracy, but I'm going to just pass the mic down the line and see what people think. So go ahead.
All right. Finally, by panel 3, we figured out that we can just pass the mic.
To everybody up there, sorry.
Well, yesterday there was another event from our good friends, Jose and Diane, that I attended, and Jose was talking about how his father, when he joined the military at a young age, was brainwashed. And I've been thinking about that a lot lately because it seems to me a lot of people have different thoughts about how to improve or save democracy, so to speak. And I'm trying to think, like, what would really be the heart of the matter? What gets to the root of the problem? And, you know, a lot of people want spending to be regulated. They want term limits. They want publicly financed elections, which we actually do have to some extent. But what good is any of this if people are brainwashed? We need the public to act with more discernment. So as far as how to do that, one way not to do that, I can tell you from experience, is to tell people they're brainwashed and they need to get over it. Don't do that. Does not work. But I think it's at least to start to recognize that's the problem and to start figuring out how to do that. The other thing I think we need to do is to travel more. And when we do an event, instead of just coming into town and leaving, to stay for 2 or 3 days. It's great to meet some of the fans from the show, Kiki, Melissa, Stefan. I'm sorry if I left anybody out. But the reality is, you can't get into a really prolonged, meaningful conversation at events like this. So for example, today, Ryan, my co-host on the Whiners, and I are going to go over to Madison Square Garden for the Trump rally. And no, we're not going to go in. We're going to be outside. Ryan's wife happens to work for Bobby Kennedy. They're going to have a table set up. And it'll be an opportunity to have more relaxed conversations instead of, hi, nice to meet you, blah, 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 and then run away. So that's more of what we need to do, I think, to ask people what to do about brainwashing and to get in front of the type of person who wouldn't ordinarily come to an event like today. I forgot who it was. Oh, it was Larry who was saying, you're all beautiful for coming. You are. But to really influence public opinion, we have to get to everybody else, too. So in our case, we love to drink wine. And so one thing we're going to do is to set up some events with wine groups. But that's just an example. It could be anything, you know, book clubs, whatever. Just try to get with groups who aren't inclined to say, oh, I want to go hear a speech about war. And it's a process. Scott has done a great job getting that process started. Instead of sitting down and writing a white paper, we're just doing it. And a big key to it is working with other podcasters and developing sort of a network between podcasters. Instead of bitching about the mass media, to work very strategically with other podcasters, each of whom have a big audience and collectively have a huge audience, if I may borrow Trump's word. And we just have to figure out more ways to do that. And like I said, instead of like thinking it all out, we're just doing it. So that's my little spiel. Thank you, and God bless America. Land that I love.
Oh, Jose and his Aristotelian skepticism of the democratic process and the people. Well, Aristotle had that skepticism as well. Yes, he did. Yes, he did. This is how it goes when we go to Sylvia's. It's pretty much the conversation. Yeah, I think everyone senses right now that we're in a very dangerous moment and we're kind of in a crossroads. Jose is right that we don't have pure democracy in that way, and that pure democracy is dangerous. That's part of why we have a constitution and a judicial branch to sort it out. Problem is, who watches the watchmen, right? That constitution is only as good as the people interpreting it. It's only as good as the people enforcing it. And when you have this complete breakdown in the intellectual and moral integrity of the society, that constitution really doesn't mean very much in the end. Recently, the Supreme Court ruled in the Twitter Files case, the Missouri case, that the government can approach these tech platforms. That's not intimidation. Now, the original judge in Missouri rightly compared it to the mafia. That's like saying, yeah, you got a nice store here, you know, you don't have to do this, but, you know, it might be a good idea if you did it. You know what I'm saying? To say that that's not the government interfering is obviously ridiculous. It seems like we are moving towards a dystopia, very much like long after Rome had become an empire, they still called it the Republic, right? It was good PR. That's what we're doing now. We're still calling this a democracy, however inaccurate that might be, as Jose points out. We're not even that within our limited terms. It's one of the craziest things I've seen over the course of my life, really, is the way that the liberal class has turned against freedom of speech. Liberal class. After the Oklahoma City bombing, the way that liberals reacted to the Oklahoma City bombing was they stocked their bookstores with the Turner Diaries so everyone could understand what motivated Timothy McVeigh. Nobody said, we can't expose people to the Turner Diaries, it's going to radicalize them. Nobody said that. You could walk into a bookstore and very easily pick up the Anarchist Cookbook. I recently, because we kind of ran into a buzzsaw with a certain self-identified pseudo-historian, I wanted to go back and look at Mein Kampf, which I haven't read since high school. Back in the day, when I read Mein Kampf, you could walk into Barnes & Noble and there was Mein Kampf. Not anymore. Not anymore. It is very hard to get a copy of it now in that way. That is very dangerous. They have convinced the liberal class that speech is right-wing. This promise of the internet, that the internet, and in some ways, yes, like this forum is an example of the internet bringing people together, but it's also been used as the greatest propaganda tool of all time, and it's made a lot of people so propagandized. I haven't seen a limit of what they can be told that they won't accept. There doesn't seem to be a limit. It doesn't matter how anti-reality it is. It doesn't matter how insane it is. You have an entire liberal class establishment that has been conditioned that if Mika says it and Maddow says it, if these figures that they've been trained to take their signals from say it, they'll believe it. They'll believe it. The majority of them wanted to put people in camps during COVID. They look to Trump for fascism, and not incorrectly, but it's coming from both ends. It's coming from both ends. So where is our salvation? That is the discontent of our times, I think.
Hello. Well, I'll say this on the discussion of what we're going to call it from a man who studies Zen. One of the intellectual and philosophical discussions in Zen is the difference between the words and symbols that we use and what they're referring to. So it doesn't matter to me what we call it. What we ultimately want is a government that represents the masses, not a tiny group that has concentrated wealth. So I'm with you guys, but ultimately, in the space that we're in now, we just got to get to a point where the government represents the people. And let me say this, 26, man, you're making me feel old. I'm across 60 here. I went to the doctor a couple weeks ago. I thought I had arthritis. He said, nah, you're good. It's an early onset of rigor mortis. But at any rate, I think that one of the things that I've noticed, coming back and forth to New York and going to the Assange events in here and in DC and all that stuff is that the people who are in the anti-war movement are also in the movement to regain our representation. I'll use that term, right? And I think the more you pay attention to that, you'll notice that they're inextricably linked. That you can't have a government that represents the people when you got 900 bases and when you have intelligence agencies that got to overthrow governments all over Africa and Latin America and the Middle East, and when you have a foreign policy that is so expensive that the money can't be used to help hurricane victims in Florida and in North Carolina and Tennessee. What happens is you cannot have representation of the people when you have a foreign policy that necessitates the funds that would be used to deal with the problems of the people and to represent the people, so that the government that we have is by its very nature in opposition to the needs of the people. It has to constantly work to propagandize the people, to convince them that they should be worried about that it's okay if we have a nuclear war as long as Putin doesn't get Donbass. But at any rate, people who'd never heard of the Donbass, who was it? One of them it wasn't Jeffries, it was the guy that just lost here in New York. Bowman. Yeah, there was an instance where he was asked, he was saying, we got to send more money to Ukraine, blah, blah, blah. And they asked him about Eastern Ukraine and the Donbass. He said, I don't really know much about that. But he had to send money there that could have gone to the poor communities in the United States. The Bronx, of all places. And I would bet he probably doesn't know very much about the Bronx either, because who cares? So I think that my point will be that don't think that you have to choose between an anti-war policy or an anti-imperialism policy or whatever you want to call it and working towards representation of the masses. They are one and the same, and you cannot, I'll put it like this, if you're exporting democracy, as they've said, they've exported all of it. They've got rid of all of it. Apparently there's none left here. So how about instead of exporting democracy, we got to use what we got for a while. That's my point.
Stand on the sofa.
No. Okay, good. No, I just want to say stop. It's okay. I'll put this in front of you. The electoral system in this country is a fraud. And I am a bit angry about it because what I had to go through to get on the ballot in New York was an outrage and criminal. And I am the only person now 2 elections in a row to get on the ballot as an independent or minor party candidate. The Kennedy team did succeed with paid petitioners, but then got thrown off on a technicality having to do with address. But it was outrageous. Now, what is the significance of that? Well, in the state of New York, they gave us the honor of arguing it in public and on the record. And what they said is we're going to create a kitty of $100 million in matching funds, which for the record, federal candidates like Jose and myself don't even get. This is only for state candidates. And the ratio is outrageous. It's 8-to-1, which is unbelievable. That's a whole other subject. But they said, since we're going to give $100 million to candidates, we don't want quote unquote frivolous candidates on the ballot. What is a frivolous candidate? Well, they define that too. Someone whose view does not conform with the majority of the voters. Now, silly me, I thought that was why we had elections. But apparently, if your view does not conform with what is already dictating the policy, then you are not allowed to run for office. And the voters of New York were disenfranchised before you even get to the polling place, because when they tripled the signature requirement, which was already 15,000 signatures in 6 weeks, one of the hardest in the country, it's now 45,000 in 6 weeks for statewide candidates. And some people here volunteered, because I only had volunteers, as did Jose. For me, we turned in 70,000 signatures. And I'm on the ballot, and they couldn't challenge it. Now, the Green Party, the Libertarian Party, the Independence Party, and I have to admit I played a role in throwing the Independence Party off the ballot last time because the Republican Party hijacked them and then committed fraud and turned in 1,000 pages of Xerox signatures. And we pointed it out because those of us who did the work did not appreciate that kind of fraud. But in 2018, over 250,000 New York voters voted for the Green Party and the Libertarian Party. And the government and the two major parties said, we don't give a damn. You don't have a right to have a voice. Now, what is the importance of that? The importance of the minor party vote is, how do you hold these bastards accountable for what they are doing? This is why I also vehemently disagree with anyone who says, oh, you're wasting your vote by voting for. We have to demonstrate that there is an opposition. And I will also just say, I think everybody should vote. Right now, and you're not allowed to say this, but I will say it, there is massive vote fraud, which I saw personally in my county, Rockland County. When I went to bed, I had, in 2022, when I ran against Schumer, I had 6,212 votes. I had 5.8%, which is about what the one poll that mentioned my name said I had in the state. But when I woke up the next morning, I only had 277 votes. And when I went to the Board of Elections for an explanation on this and to get a time-stamped record of how it could be that I lost 6,000 votes overnight, they had already reversed it. So at no point, even though I have screenshots of all of it. So I'm just telling you, the reason why we support democratic states like Israel and Ukraine is because apparently for us, they are the model of democracy, which is what we are doing here in the United States. And that is why panels like this are so urgent, because people have to know this, and then we have to fight in every possible domain. The elections emphatically are not enough. Obviously, I think they're important, or I would not be wasting my time running for office, but I'm well aware that this is not going to provide us the answer, and I want to tell you that going into this. New York, I've heard, I don't know, someone can correct me if it's true, maybe the only state that has only 2 presidential candidates on the ballot. New Jersey has 9, just to give you an example. And for this state, it's the first time since 1876 that there have been only 2 presidential candidates. So that's the extent to which it has come. It is outrageous. It is not known, and you don't have to wait to election day to prove vote fraud, because it happened before you got to vote, because they took the people off the ballot.
I just want to add this to Diane. You see, the reason that your views don't align with the voters is because they define the voters as Wolf Blitzer and Rachel Maddow. Oh, true story. A former retired CIA, but a lot of people probably know who it is, CIA officer told me he was in CIA headquarters and he saw Wolf Blitzer walking down the hall unescorted, which you're not allowed to do, with a coffee cup.
What's the next coffee?
Anyone else want anything to add? Oh, did you want to add something? Okay. I did want to add something, and so I'm going to break my moderator privilege again. I think the fact that, as Diane pointed out, that there are 9 presidential candidates in New Jersey, only 2 here. Does that mean that, like, New Jersey has 4 times more democracy than New York does? So, well, before I pass it back to you, or to anyone, it's like, you asked the question, well, who watches The Watchmen? That already, if you have to ask that question, I think you don't think you're capable to actually do that. Well, I think you are. I think everyone here in this room is capable to be the authority to uphold those principles in the Constitution.
Yeah, I am, but what about them?
Well, actually, yeah, what about them? But what about them? Isn't it your responsibility to make other people capable to do the same thing? I mean, that's why we have schools, right? That's why we have teachers. If this is not going to be me passing it back and forth to Russ, I promise.
Actually, to address what Diane was talking about, New York is very defined by its legacy as the birthplace of Tammany Hall. And by way of Tammany Hall, we, amongst our gifts to the world, we created the electric chair, and we also created the American style of political corruption. That whole urban machine style politics, we invented it. We were so good at it, other states would send delegations to New York to study at the feet of the masters of Tammany Hall. That's why you see similar urban machine style politics pop up in Chicago and Philadelphia and Rhode Island. They literally came to New York to hang out with the Tammany Hall guys to figure out how to do that. We still have a lot of vestiges of Tammany Hall in our politics today, like the fact that you need to register, change with a party. What is it, 90 days? Was it 90 days? No other state has these kinds of stringent rules. It's all designed to protect the party. Ocasio-Cortez, when she was running against Joe Crowley, one of the reasons that's such a sweet gig that Joe Crowley had, the Queen's chairman, is you manage the probate. And when people die intestate, if it doesn't get resolved and passed on, you get a kickback. I think it's like 20% of the estate. This is some old time Tammany Hall shit you got going on in New York. And this, where they just, Andrew Cuomo, when he got busted, and people were so shocked, I was like, that's some old school New York shit right there. Oh yeah, hooking up his brother and doing favors for the hospital lobby. Like, New York has always run that way. And then going out the door, you know what? We're going to make it even more impossible for third parties to get onto the ballot. Let's triple the signature requirements. Anybody who says, well, you have to vote for Democrats because they got democracy right in the name and they're going to protect your democracy, I say, well, New York State has mostly been run by Democrats for over a century, and it's the least democratic state in the country by many measures. So in the end, and that's not an argument for Republicans, in the end, ruling class gonna ruling class, right? If you put them in power for that long unchecked, they're all gonna do that. They're all going to disenfranchise the voters. You, as the voters, you are the enemy to these people. They don't want you involved in the political process. They have no respect for your opinion. What is so dangerous now, going back to what you were asking about it being our responsibility. Yes, it is our responsibility, but you have got such an awesome array of propaganda tools. We've always been a very propagandized country, but maybe never so much as now. You have a technology. It's on the one hand, Yes, it brings us together and it allows us to do things like this. On the other hand, it's literally warping people's brains. It is literally making people dumber. It is making it harder for people to concentrate. They have brain scans of 3-year-olds showing that being exposed to these screens is neurologically altering them. What's going to happen when this generation comes of age? Are they even going to have the reasoning capacity to be a challenge to power? When you do podcasting and this kind of thing, you learn a lot over time because it's the job. You're constantly reading new books and absorbing more information. I mean, over the course of the time doing this, I'm much more radical than when I started because of the things that I've researched. And the more you research, the more you realize a lot of what you think is organic is not organic. It's a lot of what you think came up out of the culture naturally or came out of academia. No. You think the intelligence services are going to manipulate politics, and then they're going to get to the biggest pop stars and say, leave that alone. Let's not mess with that. So what you're talking, join, and going back to what Judge Knapp was talking about with the college students, I think their plan backfired in a way. They spent decades focusing them on colonial settler projects and being anti-racist, but they only wanted them focused on historical events. They never intended them to do anything that was going to actually fuck with the money. And as soon as what happened in Gaza happened, they said, oh, that's like what we learned from Frantz Fanon. Let's go fight it. And they found out they didn't mean a word of it. And it's radicalized that generation. If there's a place of hope, it's that, because there's so much dissonance between what they taught them in order actually to disempower them and what they're actually doing.
I have a response, and then I have I'll just stand here. I have a response, and then I'll bring it back to Garland and Jeff. How many people here have actually read the Declaration of Independence? Okay, well, maybe this wasn't the room to make the example. How many people have read the Constitution? And how many people are telling the truth? See, I think the problem with so-called democracy or a constitutional republic and whether or not who watches the Watchmen begins with you. Because if you don't actually know where you're even living or coming from or your own history, how can you even begin to defend it? How can you even begin to make an argument as to whether or not it's worth defending? How many people would read the Declaration of Independence today or the Constitution today and even agree with it? There might be things in there you might disagree with. There used to be a man named James Bevel who was a civil rights leader. He said that people should read the Constitution, people should read the Declaration of Independence and sign it. And what you would find is that people would read it and they might disagree with certain things in it. It's a very interesting thing. So that's just that. Back to this idea of so-called saving whatever we're calling it, democracy, republicanism. There was a situation in which outlets like RT and Sputnik were just shut down. I wanted to ask you, Garland, about that, comment on that situation, and then I wanted to ask you, Jeff, what is it that the new medium of podcasts are doing to help subvert that? So I'll start with Garland, and then you can pass it to Jeff.
Well, I think what we're looking at is a crackdown on media. We see certainly a shadow banning, particularly everyone here who does YouTube knows, boy, especially the last couple of weeks leading up to the election, those numbers have cranked down. And to me, you can look at it as a negative, but I think what it really shows is that the people in power understand the power of ordinary people communicating amongst themselves. A big part of YouTube, believe it or not, a big part, and Russell knows this too, it's not just what, Danny, everybody, what we're doing. Look in the chat. people in the chat are having a conversation about what's going on at the time. People in the chat are meeting each other and making suggestions. Hey, literally, we get things. Hey, have you heard of this guy? He wrote a book about such and such. Maybe you should have him. You'll see that in the chat and you'll contact the person. It'll be one of your best guests. So a lot of people here are an important part of the conversation. And what we're seeing, the crackdown, and I always put it like this, we always, if you're the person doing the talking, you feel like, oh, they're cutting into my free speech. That ain't it. They're really cutting out the masses' right to listen. I could get hit by a truck tomorrow. Any of us could disappear. But you have a right to listen to anything you want to. And it's not that they really want to shut us up per se. It's they don't want you to hear alternative perspectives and then discuss them amongst yourself to the point where you get disgusted with the people who are usurping your rights. So I think that what we're seeing here in a paradoxical kind of way is a good thing as they crack down, because it shows that they understand the power and it shows that they're working. We're going to push back. It doesn't matter. It's whack-a-mole. They can shut us down. They can do whatever they want to. But people are like, I'm shadow banned. I always say, share this on all your social media platforms so that, they can. So what am I saying? They can turn my voice down, but they can't stop you from sharing it all over the place. And you'll even see sometimes they'll shut us down. Our numbers will go down. People will start sharing it and the numbers will come back up and even out. So the power of all of these individuals together, I think, is what is starting to overcome. And look at this election. The third party, second party, we only really got one. The alternative, I believe, and a lot of people are looking at the numbers saying that alternative candidates are going to really shock the ruling elite with the kind of numbers that are going. I know, I have a friend who in 2020 had said to me, you're going to do the right thing, right? I'm like, what's that? You're going to vote for Joe Biden. And I'm like, not exactly, how that goes. That conversation that goes with like a friend or family member, you don't really want to argue with them. And but you don't want to say, you got to be kidding me, But at any rate, that person just said, yeah, the other day I just went and voted for Jill Stein. Which, whoever you want, libertarian, communist party, I don't care, but it's a start. It's saying that people are opening their eyes, realizing that the ruling elite are not their friends, are not looking out for them. And now you can have a discussion with someone who says, I'm tired of them. The old, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. So I think that we shouldn't be down about what's happening. We should say this is a natural occurrence. The more effective we are, the more the machine. John Conyers, who I knew well, used to come on my show all the time. Great guy. He used to have like the out of Afghanistan caucus and the out of Iraq caucus, and then they Me Too'd him. Not a coincidence, right? But he used to always say, don't forget, Garland, when you fight City Hall fights back. So this is City Hall feeling the pain, understanding that their narrative's starting to fall to pieces and they're reacting to it. So don't get down on what's happening. That just means you have to work harder because you are being far more effective. They know how effective you're being. You need to understand that what they're doing is reflecting your effectiveness back to you by trying to fight it.
Amen.
I'm almost as optimistic as Garland about what podcasters can do. There's a lot of potential, obviously, and we're going for it as much as we can. But I'm also a little bit worried because there's this term called choke point, which some of you may be familiar with. We have to have a number of things all come together for it to really work and to be successful as podcasters. And they can stop us or at least hurt us at any point within this context. And that's what I mean by choke points, meaning that if the payment processor nixes us, it could be a problem. If the internet provider nixes us, if the bank nixes us, everybody's heard about the social media platforms imposing censorship, pressured by the government, but it's all this other stuff too. And now we see the U.S. government corralling their friends in other countries to be, proxy censors essentially for the U.S. So it's not all roses. That's why I say I'm cautiously optimistic. One last thing, I want to amplify what Diane said, because earlier I framed my comments as, really getting to the heart of the matter. I don't mean to say it's the only way. Ballot access is also a really big deal. And Diane was talking about getting a particular number of signatures, but the other issue that's important is, what is the deadline? If the deadline is too far in advance, that makes it very difficult to get enough signatures, because people don't start to get interested in the election until it gets close to it. I remember a few years ago, I was the lead plaintiff on an ACLU lawsuit. That was before the ACLU turned to shit, Garland. And we successfully sued the state of California. I forgot the exact time period, but I think it was about a year and a half was the deadline for when you had to have a certain amount of signatures. And our argument was, that's way too far in advance. You don't need it to be that far in advance. And we won, and I think we got it chopped down to 9 months or something like that. So that's all I have to say.
Okay, we're coming down to like the last 5-10-ish minutes of the panel. And one thing I really want to emphasize to everybody in the room and to our panelists is that we are coming up on 250 years of the founding of our country. In 6 months, it'll mark 250 years since the American Revolution started, April 19th, 1775, 6 months away from now. Although there are some who think we've already passed the beginning of the American Revolution when Crispus Attucks died in 1770. That was one of the first deaths of the American Revolution, if you want to go there. It's a black man who died in 1770, was shot by the British. We've had people like Alexander Hamilton who would write letters to Gouverneur Morris, a man who was buried in the Bronx, who penned the Constitution. Who knew that?
Yeah, I did.
Two people knew that Gouverneur Morris penned the Constitution, who also knew that he was the author of the preamble. You know the words, "we the people"? He was the author of those words. Okay, great. So, see, you can't even start talking about saving it if you don't even know this. I learned it recently myself, too, actually, because I'm in the Bronx. And it's why the Bronx has Morris Heights, Morrisania. Yeah, exactly. There you go, yeah. So, but Alexander Hamilton and even Washington, in a sense, both believed that democracy was actually something that was hindering us. In a letter that Alexander Hamilton wrote to Gouverneur Morris, he said that I think the problem with compound government, which I think he was referring to this kind of direct democracy thing, is that all it takes is for one side to get people riled up over some weird divisive issues, kind of like what we have today. You bring up abortion, you lose all control in the conversation. Immigration, same thing, right? There are all of these like kinds of issues, and that's divisive. But one thing I want to ask you is Washington, in his farewell address, said that we should strive for unity, that we shouldn't try to have different parties, that we should actually try to be unified as a nation and focus on a single objective, a single orientation, or a single goal. And so I think the question I'd like to ask all of you as a way to wrap up is that attainable? And then I'll have the final say, but we'll go down the line. So, is that attainable within our lifetime? Even better.
We can have shared goals, but to take that literally, I would say no. I mean, if you're talking about like literally getting one unified goal, I don't know about that. I would say the best we can do is to get a large segment of the population to team up on several priorities.
It depends on what you mean. It's not desirable, really, to have a system where we're all on the same page. When I was talking yesterday at your event, I was talking about Asabia, the idea of uniformity of purpose, common purpose. But that doesn't mean you're all going to have common opinions. That's not. What you'd have to do to enforce that is the cure that's worse than the disease. I think we're in a moment where capitalism, as we understand it, has clearly failed and no longer works for the world as it is and as it's evolving. What are we going to do when you really don't need most of the population to run the machines anymore? What are we going to do? We have to start to think beyond capitalism. And think it's a complicated question. My views of humanity are such that I'm very skeptical of unaccountable central committees. But there are a lot of different versions of having a society that's not necessarily oriented around capitalism that are not necessarily centralized in that way. I think we need to start to think and talk about that, because I'll tell you something, they want to get rid of us. They want to get rid of us. They know they don't need the useless eaters for very much longer. I think that's part of why our food is poison at this point.
Not this food, though. This was good.
This food accepted. I think they are our rulers, our elites, are looking at a world where there are a lot less of us, and they can kind of live in an automated paradise. And if we don't start to think about that and organize, they're gonna just gradually get rid of us, I believe. So it is something we need to unify as a human race and as the workers of the world to figure out how we protect ourselves through solidarity.
You know, I think this is, you know, maybe one of the most important issues that we're talking about today, because this is where the people in power work the hardest to weaken the masses by dividing us up, you know, divide and have us talk about things that are not relative to our basic needs and just argue amongst each other, to divide us and constantly into teams. You know, and so and enforce like tribal teams and propaganda that the MAGA people, why they're evil fascists, now the liberals, they're good, and this group over here is bad. We're always getting good guys and bad guys. I once, I'm not going to say the name, but I once knew someone who made a lot of documentaries and movies, and they said, villains and heroes, villains and heroes. That's how you do it, darling. Villains and heroes. And I thought, yeah, that doesn't sound positive. But that's the game, right? So I think the issue of unity is important, understanding that this is what I always try to argue. Pushing the idea that we can have productive conversations and disagreements and walk away and still be friends. And we can say, okay, we have a lot in common, and we're still friends, we disagree. And that we can say politically, I can say, well, I think things should be this way. You say you should think things should be that way. We can kind of, everybody can vote, come up with an idea, and in the end, we come up with an answer, and we all walk away and say, I had some input into it. So I think the issue of unity is very, very important, and that we as a group don't buy into it. Because they're including me. There are people in this room that buy into the evil group, the bad guys and the good guys. Our group. You know, when I used to be in law enforcement, when I taught in the academy, and I used to say to our the recruits, I'd say it starts like this: we're the cops and we're the good guys, and these hair bags. I actually heard that term, hair bags out there. They're the bad guys. You can't trust them. Then it becomes our department. Man, we're right now. State police over there, Baltimore City Police. I can't trust them. Then eventually it becomes, my shift, we're the good guys. I trust the guys on the other shift. And it ends up, I'm the good guy. I mean, me and my partner, we're the good guys. The other group's on our beat. And eventually you start looking at your partner. You know what I mean? But that's the game. And we have to, I think, avoid the conversations and avoid everything that says this group over there is bad. You can disagree with the group, but do not tag them as evil people. Even if you're really unhappy with what they do, here's the way I like to look at it. Look at them and say, somebody comes to you with the worst propaganda at all. You can say, that person's a victim of propaganda. That's what they are. Don't get mad at the victim. They're a victim of propaganda. Maybe your job is to try to find a way to feed them a little truth every now and then and walk away and hope it, give them a seed of truth and walk away and hope it grows. Be an example for what it is that you want. If you think about the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King, you talk about the people who are involved, they always use the word love. Are you an example? Are you showing love and caring? Are you being an example for the people that you want to change? So be an example for people. Don't get mad at the victims of propaganda. Consider it your duty to try to educate them a little bit at a time and to give them a little something and walk away and hope it grows. That's my thoughts on unity.
Well, I think 65 million years ago, there was a gigantic asteroid or something that smashed into the Gulf Coast of Mexico and destroyed 99.9% of all life and all species on this planet. Now, we are such morons that at this advanced state, we actually don't know what's coming our way. I think one of the greatest pieces of news we could get is that an asteroid that's 15 miles in diameter is exactly 6 years away from striking Earth, and we're going to have to figure out how we knock that thing out of its trajectory and save our planet. And I think you would see people coming together very quickly, because there are certain nations that have a capability in space who've been doing the research, who could pool their talents. We saw it when we were going to put a man on the moon. Anyone who's seen the movie Hidden Figures knows that you had a group of African American women who were geniuses, and they decided they needed them at NASA, and a number of them became the first ever Black female engineer to graduate from wherever, because we had to get something done. So I think I don't know if there's a giant asteroid out there. One of the best telescopes for that was in Puerto Rico, Arecibo, and it got destroyed supposedly in a storm. I'm a little suspicious. We haven't rebuilt it. But I think that might be one of the best things, is to find out that 6 years from now, there is some mega thing hurtling at us at hundreds of thousands of miles an hour. And if we don't figure out how to knock it off course, all of us and everything, even the cockroaches, are going to be dead.
I'd like to answer my own question. There's a musical and dramatic term, unity of effect, and that requires massive differences to be resolved, but never suppressed. And the effect has to be forward motion, economic progress, and development of greater freedom, not less. Greater originality, not less. The day we don't have interventions is the day we die. That's how we challenge our assumptions, and that's how we become better. And so before I pass it back to Scott to close it off, I want to thank Diane, Garland, Russell, Jeff. Let's hear it for them.
Big round of applause for Jose Vega. We saved the best panel for last. I want to thank everybody for sticking around for the panel, and I want to thank you for coming out today. This has been a monumental event, but the event, it's a two-way street. We had some of the best panelists you could possibly imagine come together, but we had the best audience possible, and we had the best venue possible. Please, a big round of applause for Mirso Likic and the staff of the Tuba City Steakhouse. I think they did an outstanding job, and make sure to shake their hands on the way out, and if you didn't get a drink from the bar, tip the lady anyways. But again, thank you very much. This has been something I was hesitant to do. It's something that I think we'll do again, because it was a great success. Knowledge is power. We definitely work to empower ourselves with knowledge and information. When I kicked this thing off, I said that this was part of what we call Operation Dawn. It's something that we put together today with the Eisenhower Media Network. Dennis Fritz and Larry Wilkerson send their apologies. Unfortunately, they live down south in Washington, D.C., and they need to get out of town before a wave of foreigners invades New York. But they want to extend their deepest gratitude for everybody who came out and made this event possible. And I would say on behalf of Jeff Norman, Ryan Milton, outside myself, U.S. Tour of Duty, we thank you dearly also. Operation Dawn is 4 questions, simple questions, that I ask every American to consider in the lead up to the election. What would you do to save democracy? What would you do to save America? What would you do to save the world through your vote in November? If you don't have an idea what those answers are today, then these panels weren't worth their weight in anything. but I actually think we gave you a lot to think on. I'm not saying you have your answers right now, but we gave you meat to chew on today. Leave here today, chew on this. One thing I always say, sorry, Dan, is never give your vote away before Election Day. Because the moment you give your vote away, they stop caring about you.
I won't.
Because you're in their pocket. Jose says he's different. Give your vote to Jose. Okay, give it to Diane too. But in general, you know, especially when you're looking at an extraordinarily tight race, you know, this race is going to come down to thousands of voters in specific swing districts of specific swing states. And if we can find a way to make defending free speech a swing issue, to make stopping nuclear war a swing issue, to make saving democracy a swing issue, and we become the squeaky wheel up until the day of the election, those people running for office are going to try and put the little grease on that squeaky wheel. And that's what we want. We want them to commit to policies that answer our questions, meet our demands as Americans. That begins today with you being here, and it continues through Election Day. Thank you very much for coming. Honor and privilege to work with you. Thank you, Jose. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you, all of you. Have a great day. Safe travels home.
Scott! Thank you. You have intentions of building an organization on Operation
Not right now, man. I'm going one step at a time.
I'd love to talk to you about the ACLU.
You want to sign off?
Let me sign off. All right, thanks a lot, everybody, and share this on all your social media platforms. We're out.
That's what I'm saying. It ends up being a lot better than I think. Oh, yeah, I know.